Thought for the day. The quality of your self-talk determines the quality of your life. Welcome to 7 Minutes for Yourself. I'm Christina, and I'm so glad you've joined me for what I believe will be 7 of the most enriching minutes of your day. Let's take this time to reconnect with ourselves and improve our well-being. In today's episode of 7 Minutes for Yourself, we're talking about utilizing self-awareness to discourage negative self-talk. Have a listen.
Yeah, so in some ways, I think you don't want to get too complicated with it. It's just the way you talk to yourself in your head. Like we all talk to ourselves. I think some of us are more or less aware of how much we talk to ourselves and sort of the quality of that speech. But I think all of us kind of understand that like thoughts kind of run through your mind. The kind of two ways I like to think about it, there's two different ways I like to approach this. One is to think about it like you have different ways of talking to different people in your life, so like I talk to my old rugby buddies from college in a very different way than I talk to my grandmother, right? It's just a different kind of style. I have like a different approach to talking, and we tend to talk about different things. So the way I talk to certain people is going to be a little bit different than the way I talk to other people. And so one way you can think about self-talk is just like you have a certain style or approach to talking with different people in your life, most of us have a certain style of talking to ourselves. And so that's one way of looking at self-talk.
So what are some of the common patterns you see with your clients of people, like how they talk to themselves, both like harmful ways or potentially some, helpful ways?
Yeah, so I think it's important to answer. I want to start this kind of answer by reminding everyone of there are different styles of communicating. And it's not that one or the other is bad or good, right? They're just better or worse or more helpful in different situations and with different people. So we can think about the same thing with ourselves, with our self-talk. And what happens when people get into trouble with self-talk is when their self-talk gets really stuck. They get stuck in a certain style of talking to themselves or about things that happen. And they can't shift gears, to introduce a new metaphor here. So like a really common one, for instance, is, technically they're called cognitive distortions, but their style, their ways of thinking about things that are either inaccurate or kind of unhelpful. And so one of them is called fortune telling, right? And fortune telling is when you are basically predicting the future. Now, the ability to predict the future it can be a really great thing. Our ability to kind of imagine like what's going to happen in the future, obviously super important. Like I'm glad we can do that, right? But we do that well when there's some data or evidence for what's going to happen in the future. When you're reasoning based on real kind of data or evidence or whatnot. But when you're doing that, when you're just catastrophizing, for instance, you're just going straight to the worst case scenario, right? Without any reason for going there. That's a mental habit you can get into. You can just get into that habit of immediately starting to tell yourself, oh, this terrible thing is going to happen, ... and then kind of going down that like rabbit hole. Another one,
this is never going to work. I'm going to fail college. No one's going to like me. Things like that, right?
Exactly. Not only is it inaccurate, right? When you're kind of making assumptions about the future, but you don't actually have any evidence or data for that, but it's just not especially helpful, right? So that's one of them. Mind reading is another one where, again, there's a useful version of this where I'm kind of listening to you and I'm inferring from your facial expressions that like, all right, Nick, like this is getting pretty boring. Like, let's move on to the next thing. Like, that's good that I can kind of read you, right? And get a sense for maybe what you're thinking.
All of these things could have a function when they're used in the right time, right? Like, so mind reading, like trying to empathize or understand what someone else is thinking can help you be a little bit more in tune to them. But then it can go wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, but if you do that constantly, like, and you do it without any sort of real evidence, if I'm just making up stories in my mind about what you're thinking of what I'm talking about, that can start to be really unhelpful. It can start to lead to a lot of unnecessary anxiety, stress, frustration, anger, whatever it is. So I think the first kind of takeaway, I think, when it comes to self-talk is just to realize there are different like styles of thinking, right? Sometimes you're going to be really kind of jokey or even sarcastic, right? Sometimes you're going to be really empathetic and supportive. Sometimes you're going to be really intellectual. Sometimes you're going to be really pragmatic. None of these are good or bad, right? But they're different styles of thinking. And just like you can have different styles of thinking about the world and what's happening, you can have different styles of thinking about yourself and talking to yourself.
So how do we do that? How do we start changing our self-talk? So first thing you mentioned is like get a name for it. Find out a name, learn about these cognitive distortions, and then start being aware of them, start noticing them. And then if you can catch them soon enough, you can rewrite them, right?
Exactly. Yep. The kind of next like intermediary step there is starting to be aware not just of these patterns of thinking, these distortions, but triggers, right? Certain things in your environment, certain people, certain ways of talking, certain things that happen to you are going to be especially triggering of certain patterns of self-talk. So if you can anticipate those triggers, you're going to be much more likely to catch them. Like if you just know that, on like Thursday